And then there we go, fun announcement for everyone. And then we are going to get started. So just to say to everyone, we're up to chapter 3. Now, I know a lot of people are joining for the first time this series of Shiurim this evening. As I said, they're all standalone Shiurim. They're on different parts, different chapters of the Megillah. And there'll be some things which we reference to the past, and I will go over them and do a quick review. So don't worry if you haven't been to, most of the people there haven't been to the previous Shiurim. It's absolutely fine. We will review everything. We'll go over everything. No one will be lost at any point. If you are, feel free to ask questions. But we're up to chapter 3. So I just wanted to say that, because if you're wondering why we're starting from chapter 3, that's the reason. Okay, it's not chosen at random. And also just to say as well, as an introduction for those who haven't been to the previous 2, Megillah Esther is probably my favorite book in the entire Tanakh, and there's lots of reasons why that's the case, but the main reason is that Purim itself, we know, is all about hidden depths. It's about things beneath the surface. Not everything is what it seems out on the outside. It's about things which go much deeper than that, and Megillah Esther as a book epitomizes this idea. We see so much depth. We have the external story that we're also familiar with. We've probably heard, well, we've definitely heard, lots of times. We probably think we know it off by heart. We know everything there is to know about it. But like everything else in Torah, there's so much depth if we just go beneath the surface. And that's what I really love about Megillah Esther. Just like Purim itself, it's all about, there's the external, and then let's go deeper. Let's see what's underneath. Let's see what hidden messages we can uncover. So today we're going to have a look at the hidden messages we can uncover from chapter 3. I'm going to share my screen now, so everyone can see the Megillah in front of them from Sefaria. If anyone has a Megillah themselves that they'd like to follow with, then absolutely feel free. Let me just get that up. Okay. Share screen. Okay, so everyone should now hopefully be able to see the Megillah in front of on the screen now, shared from my screen. Can anyone just unmute and tell me if they can? I'm gonna assume you can, unless I hear differently.
Yeah, we can see it.
Excellent.
Yeah,
okay.
I can see it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone. Nice to get some interactivity early on in the share. So let's just move that. Let's go. So as I say, we're starting from number 3. We are starting from chapter 3, and let's start from the beginning and work our way through. So we start at the beginning, the first verse. Sometime afterwards, King Achashverosh promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. He advanced him and seated him higher than any of his fellows. So what happens at the beginning of chapter 3 is we are introduced for the first time in this capacity to Haman, the antagonist, the Russia, the baddie of our story, if you will. This is how we introduced him for the first time with his name. Now, interestingly, you may remember in the first chapter of the Megillah, we are introduced to a character called Memuchan. Memuchan is the servant who persuades Achashverosh to kill Vashti. That's Memuchan's role. And we're told by the Rabbanim in the Gemara, they tell us that Memuchan and Haman are the same character. Now, there's a reason his name changes, we're going to discuss, but it's the same character. So we've already met Haman before, but here we're introduced to him in his new capacity with his new name. Here he is as the sort of first minister over all of Persia, as the first amongst all of the king's appointees, and we have this new name. Now, it's interesting, there's a question, why does his name change from the first time we meet him in the story to now? There's a very interesting idea, which I'm going to credit, I heard by Michael Rainsbury, if anyone knows him, and I think it's a very interesting idea. He says that the word Haman, the word Memuchan rather, reflects the idea of preparation. If anyone knows the Hebrew word hachana, it means preparation. So the Haman, the Memuchan that we meet at the beginning of the story is very cold and calculated, and everything's very detail oriented, and everything's very prepared in a very specific and exact way. The word Haman, however, has a connotation of the word hazy, which means everything becomes unclear. There's a lack of control. And we'll see that with Haman as his story develops, not yet at this point, but as we go on, we'll see that things start to unwind. This tight control, we can imagine the character, this cunning, carefully manipulating, calculating minister, politician, and suddenly things begin to unwind for him as the story develops. And just to take a note, because it's interesting, have a look as we go through the Megillah, particularly when we get to the later chapters, how many times the word maher, which means in Hebrew quickly, how many times that word is used. Things start to unravel too fast. Haman is no longer in control. That's one idea behind this name change. But at this point, we have this cold, calculating, clever, manipulative leader who has been promoted and rose above all of the other ministers of the king's court. And here he finds himself as the first minister, as the prime minister of all of Persia. Now, interesting to point out, when we met Memucan in chapter 1, he was one of the king's inner circle, but he was 7th amongst that inner circle. He wasn't the first, he wasn't in the top 5, he was 7th amongst the king's inner circle, and he rose to prominence. He managed to overtake all of those people with his cunning. One of the big ways he was able to do that is by his advice to the king to kill Vashti. He kind of stepped out of line. He spoke before all the others. All the others were quiet. He took his opportunity.
Has Alden been report yet?
Sorry? Okay. Don't know if anyone had a question there, but he took his opportunity. He spoke before any of the others could answer. He gave his advice, and from that, he propelled on this new career path, which took him to be the prime minister over all of Persia. Now, the other just thing to point out is the name Haman Ha'agagi. Haman is the Agagite. Agag is, for anyone who knows that Tanakh well, was the king who was the Amalekite king. So we know Haman is a direct descendant of Amalek. And Agag is the king that Saul, the first king of Israel, was commanded to kill. And Saul delayed this decision. He left him alive overnight. There were various reasons behind this. And during that last night he was alive, Agag was able to continue his line. And from that came Haman. And from that, the Jews were nearly destroyed. Again, we have just this idea that's a prominent idea we're going to see in the Megillah, this idea that there's all sorts of things going on in a meta level, on a universal, in heaven, court cases, decisions being made that you can't necessarily see on earth at the time. And this is one of them. The fact that Saul allowed Agag to live that one more night, the Jews were almost destroyed and wiped off the face of the earth from it. And from that, we have this entire story. And we're going to see in a bit how that interlinked with our story as well. That's that story of Saul. And of course, Saul lost the kingship and it was given to David from that point. Now, if we move over to verse 2, all of the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow low. So all of the servants, everyone at the king's gate were commanded not just to respect Haman, but to bow to him, to physically bow low and kneel to him anytime he walked past. And famously, we know Mordecai refused to do that. And the question is, why did Mordecai refuse to do that? Was it just a sort of a case of stubbornness? We would have to think, knowing Mordecai as the great leader we know him to be, there's something deeper going on. So one answer that's given by the Midrash is that Haman wore around his neck an idol, and therefore Mordecai refused to bow to it, because bowing to Haman would be bowing to this idol. It would be avodah zarah, it would be idolatry, idol worship. And we know that's one of the sins that we cannot do, one of the cardinal sins that we cannot commit. Even at the forfeit of our own life, we're not allowed to do idolatry, and therefore Mordecai refused, and nothing was going to change his mind. He wouldn't bow to Haman. Now, there's a question about this, whether this is literally true. Did Haman literally wear an idol around his neck? I want to suggest something a little bit different, that perhaps it's true, perhaps there's something deeper going on. And the idol is actually a metaphor for Haman's philosophy on life. Haman's philosophy on life was all about chaos and randomness. That was what he believed. He believed that chance and chaos and randomness governed everything that happened in life. There was no great plan. There's no great order. There's no God guiding things happening. Or if there is a God, he doesn't care what happens. It's complete chaos. It's complete randomness. The ultimate proof to this comes from the name of our festival in which we read the Megillah, Purim, and we're going to see that later on. Okay, Purim means lottery, right? Lots. We're going to see that later on. But this was Haman's philosophy, and the idea is that Mordechai didn't want to bow to this, didn't want to be subservient to this ideology, didn't want to be subservient to this philosophy wherein he would be agreeing to this idea that the world is governed by the forces of chaos and randomness. That it's completely antithetical to all of the fundamentals of Jewish philosophy, that there is a plan, there is a God who is controlling, who has a plan for the world. And so Mordechai refused to bow both physically and metaphorically, theologically, philosophically to this greater idea of Haman's, and that in of itself, as we're going to see, made Haman very irate. If we go to verse 3 rather, right, all the king's courtiers, they said, why to Mordechai, why did you disobey the king's order? And then we go to verse 4, they spoke to him day after day. We just look at the Hebrew, Vayihi kamram elav yom v'yom. They spoke to him day after day and he would not listen. And they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordechai's resolve would prevail, in order to see whether Mordechai would stick by his principles, for he had explained to them that he was a Jew. Just a very interesting idea on this word, yom v'yom. There's another time that we see a similar language in the Tanakh, and that is during Bereshit, during the story of Yosef. And that's when Yosef is tested by Potiphar's wife day after day, the same language, yom after yom, day after day. She would come to him, she would ask him to lie with her day after day. She would do this, and she would challenge him. And the Midrash says something really fascinating. It says that the reason the same language is used in both of these cases is because these cases are comparable, they're similar. And that seems very odd, because on one side you have Mordechai, who, is his challenges, he's not bowing down to Haman, he's standing up against Haman, but okay, that's difficult. But on the other challenge, Yosef's challenge would seem ostensibly much more difficult, much harder. It seems like a more intense challenge to have to go through day after day. However, the Chachamim say that it's a similar challenge. So the question is, what's the similarity that they're referring to when they say this? And an answer I want to suggest is the idea that really what was behind the challenge in both cases was an idea of both of these Tzaddikim, both of Mordechai and Yosef, having to overcome the prevalent ideology of their time and place in order to remain strong to their principles. In ancient Egypt, we know sexual immorality was very, very prevalent. And so Yosef wasn't just having to overcome the actual challenge, but he was having to overcome that ideology. He was in a place where everything said, that's okay, it doesn't matter, that's fine. He had to overcome it. He had to, day by day, he had to overcome this challenge. Similarly, the prevalent attitude that Haman was trying to implement across all of this Persian Empire was this idea, this belief in this chaos and randomness, and there's no plan. And Mordechai was having to fight that. He was having to overcome the prevalent ideology of that time. And what's interesting is we see these two characters, Mordechai and Yosef, they're very similar ultimately, because we know that these are the two characters that rise to prominence, not just in the Jewish world, but in the non-Jewish world. Both of them rise to become second only to the king, to become the first ministers, the prime ministers of their respective lands. And I think there's a powerful message here, which is that we should be involved in the world around us. It's absolutely imperative for us to do, particularly when we can rise to prominence like Yosef and Mordechai and make a difference to the better, to the betterment of the world around us. However, in order to do that, the one characteristic that we need above all is the ability to overcome any sort of immorality or challenges that are specific to our time. And so that's one thing which I think links them really interestingly together. We go to verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage. This is, I think, it's a really interesting expression here, that Haman was filled with rage. Vayamaleh Haman chema. We had another example, again, we haven't seen it inside, but we had another example when Vashti refused King Ahasuerus. The words that it's used, Ahasuerus was also very angry, but it says that Ahasuerus became very angry. So Ahasuerus became very angry. Conversely, with Haman, he became filled with rage. I think there's an important difference, a slight difference in the language, but it represents an important difference in the characteristic. Ahasuerus, as we're going to see and discuss, and we have seen already, was by no means perfect. In fact, the Chachamim, we saw a lot of this in the first two chapters, and we'll continue to see it. The Chachamim had taken a very negative view on Ahasuerus. But for all his faults, he wasn't as bad as Haman. And one of the differences between them is that whilst Achashverosh's anger, he became very angry, Haman's anger consumed him. Haman's emotions consumed him. We just got a bit of noise there. Mute themselves. Haman's anger consumed him, and he could not focus on anything else. And you think about it, to think about getting so angry to the extent that you're going to exterminate an entire people because one person refuses to bow to you. But that was Haman. He was consumed by his emotions. He was consumed by his feelings. And we're going to see later on a really beautiful expression of this, which has a really lovely message for us all. If we move on to verse 6. But he disdains to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai's people were. Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of Achashverosh, right? Haman became so angry that, like we said, not only does he want to kill Mordecai, which in of itself maybe would seem an overreaction, he wants to wipe out all of Mordecai's kin. He wants to wipe out an entire nation, a prevalent, prominent, ancient nation, because of this one man, because of this one individual. And the Gemara tells us that at first, Haman said, I'm going to kill Mordecai, and then it did nothing for him. He thought, no, I'm going to go more than that. I'm going to kill the rabbis. I'm going to kill the leaders. And even that wasn't enough. So eventually he goes, no, I'm going to kill all the Jews. I need to kill all of them. And I guess the question is, why was it that Haman felt such wrath based on this one person that he went to the extreme to enact a genocide effectively? And the answer, I think, goes back to our deeper understanding of why Mordecai refused to bow. Think about this: an individual whose entire thought process, entire ideology on life revolves around the idea of randomness and chaos and chance. And here you have a people who go against all logic by sticking to their traditions, by sticking to their beliefs. Even when they're dispersed, even when they're in exile, they still stick to their traditions, their laws, their beliefs, and they stay strong, and they manage to maintain their Judaism, and they keep to God's plan. That goes against everything that Haman believes in. And Mordecai's refusal to bow to him makes Haman realize that this is the case. So it's easier for us to understand why there was this great hatred of Haman, because it wasn't just one man refusing to bow. It was a people who symbolized the complete opposite of everything that Haman believed in. So if we move on to to the next verse, verse 7, in the first of the month of Nisan, 12th year of King Achashverosh, Pur, which means lot was cast. Lots were cast but before Haman. This is when he's deciding, when am I going to kill the Jews, right? Every day and every month. The 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So it fell on the lot. Haman cast these lots to decide when he's going to kill the Jews. And it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Now, this really epitomizes this idea of Haman's philosophy. You have this man who is so filled with anger by the actions of one man that he is going to kill an entire people. And yet, if you think about that character, you'd think he'd do it straight away in a fit of burning anger. But that's not what Haman did. He cast lots. He said, it's for order, it's for chance, it's for randomness to decide when this takes place. And it ends up taking place when he cast the lots. We were in Nisan. In fact, we're told it was Erev Pesach, going into Pesach. When he cast the lots, it was in Nisan. And Adar, which is the other end of the year, Nisan's the first month of the year, Adar is the 12th. So he had to wait almost an entire year to enact this plan. And such was how strongly he believed in this idea of randomness and chance. It just really kind of sums it up, how much he believed in all of this. So we see, if we go to verse 8, we see Haman now comes to King Achashverosh to convince him. He says to King Achashverosh, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed amongst the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. And it's not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them, right? The first question that we have is, why is there an ambiguity here? Why does Haman not explicitly mention the Jewish people? And there's a few answers we want to share, which I think maybe all of them are true, maybe only one of them is true, but all of them give us a real insight into a depth of the story. The first answer is that Achashverosh was aware of the history of the Jews. He was aware that there had been lots of people who'd gone before who tried to destroy them and failed in this process. Therefore, Haman didn't want to go to Achashverosh and say, let's go and kill the Jews, let's get rid of the Jews, because Achashverosh knew his history. He knew of Pharaoh and all the people after him who had tried and failed and died in this attempt to destroy the Jews. And he knew that Achashverosh might say no, having this knowledge of history, if he were to mention explicitly that we're going to kill the Jews. So he goes when he says there's a certain people, and he doesn't say it's the Jews. That's one idea. The second idea was something that for those who were there in the first two Shiurim, we already mentioned, and it actually adds an interesting tone to the Megillah, which is that if you look at the end of the Megillah, it's written as a letter to be sent out straight after these events happen. And that makes it really interesting and really unique amongst the books of the Torah, of the Tanakh even. It's written as a letter that's going to be sent out and read there and then in that time. And what that means is Achashverosh had to approve it. Achashverosh would have read, he was still the king, he would have read the Megillah. And therefore, the Megillah often tries to absolve Achashverosh of blame. He was still the king when it was written. Mordechai was his first minister. He couldn't outright sort of speak about him negatively. And perhaps this is one way that Mordechai is trying to absolve Achashverosh of blame, just by saying that Achashverosh never knew it was the Jews. He never knew who it was. He never had any information. It was all Haman's plan, and Achashverosh is absolved of blame. Again, just an interesting thing to keep in mind as we go on. As you read the Megillah, think about maybe how that affects how it's written. Why is Achashverosh not written as this outright evil character? The Chachamim tell us that's what he is. He was a bad person, but he's not written like this, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why. And the third reason, and I think this is very powerful, and we're going to see this continue, is that the Midrash portrays that Achashverosh was a master of propaganda. We're going to see this in the next verse. He was an absolute master of propaganda. And we know perhaps that one of the first steps in any attempts of propaganda against a certain nation, we know this all too well, unfortunately, from our history, is a dehumanization process. Perhaps Haman isn't using the name of the Jews, because by naming, there's a certain people, there's a group, he's not naming them. That's part of his first step in dehumanizing and criminalizing the Jews, and he then points out their flaws and their differences. And this is part of his propaganda to convince Achashverosh and then all the people to take up arms and destroy the Jews. And so if we go into the next, verse here, verse 9, if it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for the destruction, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the stewards for a deposit in the royal treasury. Just going back to the previous line, I realize there's a couple of things we just forgot to point out before we move on to that verse. Just a couple of interesting ideas. There's a certain people who are scattered and dispersed amongst the other people in your realm whose laws are different. And this idea of their laws being different, we have seen in the first couple of chapters. I know not everyone was there, but we will continue to see that there is an obsession in the Persian society with law and order. Interestingly, how that conflicts with Haman's own ideology, which is something we'll go into later. But there's an obsession with law and order. So people whose laws are different is going to be something which the king is very worried about. Achashverosh is very concerned with keeping order and maintaining his power, and people whose laws are different are going to cause difficulty. And the Gemara says something really interesting about what Haman means here and what he actually said here, which were their laws are different. He was referring to the festivals. He was referring to the festivals that the Jewish people keep. And he said that the Jewish people have all these festivals at different times. And when they have the festivals, they drive up the prices of certain delicacies because they're celebrating. But their festivals aren't in line with our festivals. And it ruins our economy and it causes chaos. And it's really interesting to think that these arguments that are written in the Gemara from thousands of years ago, literally, there are similar arguments which anti-Semites might use today about economical ruin or jealousy or difference or people just being different. And this was what Haman's tactics were here. It's also interesting to point out that when we say scattered and dispersed, the Gemara points out that this is referring to the fact that the Jewish people were not united. The Jewish people in of themselves did not come together as one community, one kehillah. And we know that when that happens, when we disperse, when we fight amongst ourselves, that's when we're most vulnerable. When we come together, we can be forgiven and we can overcome any issues that are going to come our way. So going on, just reverting now back to verse 9, we see Haman actually pays Achashverosh for the privilege, as it were, to kill the Jews. And the Gemara points out that this is the fulfillment of the Tochacha. The Tochacha that we read tells us, if we think back to all of the curses that are given, one of them is that our enemies will pay for us and will be led away as slaves and killed. And this is actually what's happening here. Achashverosh is paying, Haman is paying Achashverosh in order to kill the Jews. We move on to verse 10. Thereupon the king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman's son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of the Jews. Now, just interestingly, one of the key concepts of the Megillah, one of the key ideas beneath the surface of the Megillah, we haven't seen it much yet in this chapter. We saw it in chapter 1 and 2, and we will see it later on as well, is that Achashverosh is a very paranoid and insecure king. And if we think about that, it really helps us to understand and explain a lot of his actions. He's insecure, just to give a brief reason potentially why that is, that we saw in chapter 1, but I know a lot of people weren't there. The one idea behind this is Achashverosh did not come from royal blood. Vashti, the queen, was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She came from royal blood. Achashverosh sort of fought and dealt, sort of backstabbed his way to power. He usurped power through violence. He was not a natural royal, and that kind of led to his insecurity and his obsession with trying to keep power in any way he could. So the question here is, with that in mind, why would Achashverosh take off his ring, the signal of his power, and give it to Haman? Why would a king who is so concerned and so afraid of losing power, take the action to give someone all of the power that they have? And there's a couple of answers to this, but the one I think is very interesting is this idea of Achashverosh knowing the history of the Jews. We mentioned this before, knowing that those who go up against the Jews, those who try and destroy the Jews, it often backfires on them. And so there's this idea that Achashverosh was saying to Haman, yes, you can do what you want. You've paid me, you can do what you want, but I'm not going to take responsibility for it. I am taking a step back. I am taking a step back and allowing you to be the one who issues the edict. Here's my ring, go and do it. I'm not going to be the one to go toe-to-toe. I'm not going to be the adversary of the Jews. And that's why in the next line, Haman's now called the adversary of the Jews, not Achashverosh. Haman is the one who is undertaking all of this. It's one possible idea which could lead a king obsessed with power, obsessed with keeping power, to this sort of rather counterintuitive act of taking off their signet ring, taking off their power, and assigning it to someone else. And the king then says, the money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit. And we see now on the 13th day of the month, the king's scribe, the decree was issued. It was sent to every province. It was sent to all the people, and it was ordered in the name of Achashverosh and sealed with the king's signet. Again, just a hint to the difference between the name Achashverosh and the ring, because it was Haman who used the ring. And accordingly, it was written to all the Jews, and there was an edict to destroy, to massacre, to exterminate all of the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the 13th of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. Again, a link to the kind of jealousy, perhaps, or sort of that fueled the hatred and the anti-Semitism that was prevalent at that time. The fact that they sort of, what was the clincher to get people involved was the idea to plunder their possessions. The text of this document was to the effect that the law should be proclaimed in every single province. It was publicly displayed so that they may be ready for that day. And now we come to a word that we spoke about earlier. The couriers went out post haste. The chufin, they went out very, very quickly. And this is the first time we see this idea of things happening quickly. It's going to continue happening. This word's going to become more and more common. The king and Haman sat down to feast. It's interesting, they use the word feast here. The Hebrew word is lishtot, which really means to drink. They sat down to drink to their new accord. V'ha'ir Shushan navocha. The city of Shushan was dumbfounded. Not just the Jews, the entire city was dumbfounded, dumbstruck by this issue, this decree that had seemingly come out of nowhere. And despite that, Haman and Achashverosh are now sitting down to drink, because for them the matter is resolved. And that really is very telling, not just into Haman's character, as we know, but into Achashverosh. One of the, again, subtle hints to this idea that Achashverosh is not necessarily or not at all faultless in this. In fact, he's sitting down to drink to celebrate the destruction of the Jews. Even if he doesn't know it's the Jews, he's sitting down to drink to celebrate the destruction of a people in his kingdom. And so we see there's a lot of things being set up. There's a lot of ideas being set up here. We are going to end there because we have finished chapter 3. If anyone has any questions, particularly on that chapter, please let me know. Really, this is only part 1 or part 3, really, of a series of shiurim we're going to do every Sunday at this time, all the way up until Purim itself. And so there's a lot of things that might be cliffhangers. There's a lot of things we've set up here, and you might be sort of eager for the answer. It's going to happen next Sunday. It's specifically done like that. That's how the Megillah works. The whole time there are forces at conflict, which we're going to discuss in the Megillah, and not until right at the end the Jews do teshuva and everything's resolved. But for all of us, hopefully, I hope you join next week and we can continue this journey through the hidden messages of the Megillah. I'm going to stop the recording now. If anyone has any questions, any comments, please feel free. If not, I look forward to seeing you all